Hey friends, welcome back to another Seed Talk with Lisa and Layne. Hey Layne,
Hello, how are you?
I am super good today because we have a special announcement, right?
We do.
Y'all, this this has been under how long has this taken, Layne? You know better than me.
It's been over a year.
Yes, yes. And that baby's being born today, and we are
Yes.
super excited to tell you guys about it. All right, Layne, what's up?
All right. Drum roll, please. Do you want to announce it, Lisa, while I pull it up?
Yes, I will. So, Layne and I have been working on a brand new course, y'all. Cool flowers from seed to harvest. Look at that picture. And that picture to me, Layne, what a great choice, is a perfect illustration from starting the seed and growing it up to the beautiful end result, right? It's like the rest of the story.
It is. So I'm just going to describe what this class is. And I just have to say, it is the most comprehensive video resource for anyone interested in growing cool flowers. So whether you're a flower farmer or a home gardener or just a flower lover at any level, really. And we not only walk you through the cool flowers concept, but we then do a deep dive of 36 different cool season hardy annual flowers and give you all the information you need for sowing, growing, and harvesting. And not only is this course absolutely loaded with beautiful imagery of all the flowers and plants, as well as the seeds and seedlings, but the really key part to me is that we've included real life demonstrations of things like direct seeding, sowing each transplant in soil blocks, as well as in the field demos for every single flower, showing the proper harvest stage, where to make the cut, how to strip the stems, plus all the other information you need to know to be successful.
Yeah.
And the best part is if you head over to the website, which I'm going to link in the show notes, you can actually get a free sneak peek of an entire session. So you can learn how to sow, grow, and harvest Rudbeckia hirta, aka Black-Eyed Susan, and you'll get a really good sense of what the course is all about and just how wonderful and comprehensive and practical it really is. And if you decide it's not for you, no worries, enjoy the free session, but if you're anything like us, you're not gonna be able to wait to see the rest of the flowers. And we're just so
Yeah.
excited to be able to finally share this course with all of you. And we know that it's going to serve as such a valuable go-to resource for everyone growing cool flowers.
It's like the whole enchilada, right?
It is.
There's only so much you can write about and
Right.
describe, but to see it actually come to pass is pretty amazing. So you have lifetime unlimited access. That means you can watch it over and over, which is what we hear how most people digest our how-to courses, right, Layne?
Yes.
They're out in the field and they're like, what stage am I supposed to harvest this flower or space this flower? And they can just bring it right up and take a look. And that's the way that Layne has laid out this course. It is super easy to zero in on exactly what you're looking for. So this is not a like, oh, you have to cram and watch it all because it's going away. You have lifetime unlimited access. So Layne, just kudos and great job bringing this all together to such a beautiful course. So, what is our topic today, Layne?
Well, today we have a topic that I think every cut flower grower should be interested in, and we're going to be sharing 6 tips to maximize your flower production. So, however big your space is, maybe you have acres, maybe you just have a 3 by 10 cutting patch. What are some things you can do with the flowers you're growing to maximize the amount of blooms you're getting out of that space?
I think that's a great topic. I'm often asked, well, how many stems am I going to get from XYZ flower? And I always start my reply with number one is your skill and how you plant it and care for it. And because a little plant can't do but so much alone, right?
Right. And there are so many things we could have included in here. Like I mentioned, we're just going to limit our discussion to 6, but this actually could be much wider had
Yeah.
we had all day to talk about it. And we're also going to be assuming that you're starting with varieties that are meant to be good cut flower varieties. So I just want to say that before we get into it.
That's an excellent point.
Okay, so the first thing we're going to start with is providing the plant's preferred conditions. So that could be anything from what sun conditions do they prefer? If they need full sun, don't put them in part shade and expect them to pump out the same amount of flowers. Or do they need really good drainage? Do they need additional fertilizer? Or is it a plant that needs to be watered more or less frequently? So, those are just some things you definitely need to consider when you're wanting to maximize the production of your beds.
Yeah, that's a really good point, Layne. I'm often hear from folks, I'll say, well, what are your light conditions like? Well, it does get sun in the morning. And if you just think about it, because we're cutting on these plants, they really need the energy to regrow, and the
Yeah.
sun and the light is really an important part of that. So I think that the sunlight portion of this underestimated of just how important that is.
It's true. And like you mentioned, one of the things with sunlight is I garden, like you know, Lisa, we're in a woodland setting. So I have a lot of beds in part sun or part shade conditions. And sometimes you don't notice that it's affecting the flowers on the first round. But when you cut, they don't
Yes.
spring back quite as quickly as I would imagine they would in full sun.
That is so true. They don't regrow, you know?
Right.
I mean, yeah, you're kind of, yeah, it's very disappointing.
It is. And then how about something like watering? If something needs to be watered more or less?
Yeah, and I think that your mention of drainage and related to watering, excellent drainage is so very necessary. And we just, unless the water puddles on the ground, we don't really realize when we have crummy drainage. Um, but if you have heavy soil, as many of us do, meaning like clay soil that air and water just don't move through freely, not only is that kind of stifling to your roots, but water just hangs out for a longer time. And when water hangs out, I don't know if you've ever set a glass of water somewhere and left it sitting for days and came back and it's like, oh my gosh, there's stuff growing in there. I
Yeah.
mean, water needs to move to stay healthy and to stay not fresh, but to stay fluid, right? So, yeah, watering is super important. And then the drainage component related to water, whether it's water from the sky or the water you're actually providing. And, never, ever, ever, in my experience, because I don't live on a beach, we've never had too much drainage. you
Right.
know, you can always pump up really sandy soil with compost, just like you pump up heavy clay soil with compost. The same medicine works for both issues.
And a consideration in terms of fertilizer is there are certain plants that if you give them too much fertilizer, they may produce all foliage and no bloom. So that's another thing to be aware of.
Yeah, if Cosmos is an often overfed crop, and then people wonder why they get all foliage, but that's exactly what happens. As a general rule, I don't do a lot of fertilization with Cosmos. Also, not for the very same reason, but we do the same thing kind of with zinnias. Zinnias are very predisposed to mildew, and if they all have it, there's always traces in my experience. And feeding them will kind of feed the mildew as well as the plant.
All right, now we're going to move on to our second point, and that is to space your plants closely. And a lot of times when people are first starting a cutting garden, they don't actually realize how closely they can actually space their plants.
I find this even so true with really seasoned gardeners that have never grown a cutting garden before. And the best way to think about it is that you're going to be cutting a cutting garden, or you should be cutting a cutting garden twice a week. And just think of it as a hard pruning. Just think what your trees would look like if you pruned them,
Yeah.
several times a year instead of just once a year. And so, because you're just continually cutting those branches and cutting stems, it just allows you to pack more plants more closely together, because your constant harvesting is actually creating a lot of air circulation, and what they need to actually regrow.
And what's your standard spacing for most things? Obviously, this varies, but just your general spacing for a lot of your branching plants.
Sure. So our beds kind of are usually about 30 inches wide, and we typically put 4 rows of plants down those beds and in the row about 6 inches apart.
And another interesting experiment you can do is sometimes an individual plant will produce more stems at a certain spacing, but the stems per square foot might actually be less when you look at the bed overall. So that's something you can actually do is you can
Yeah,
experiment with different spacings and actually count the number of stems you're getting off it to perfect that for your growing conditions.
that is very true.
All right, now on our third point, and this is going to be to consider pinching your branching plants. And that might mean pinching all your plants, or it might mean just pinching some of them, which has benefits of its own.
Yeah, so pinching, branching, if you're growing branching annuals, which is the lion's share of what we grow, that means a plant that grows more than one stem with one flower, like a sunflower, right? Pinching them actually encourages the plant to start branching sooner in the growth habit. So my rule has always been, because I'm kind of greedy, I want as many flowers as fast as possible, right? As a flower farmer. And so we pinch when we're planning what we're going to do. I'll pinch 50% of the plants of one crop. That means I get early branching, but those that I don't pinch means I get early blooms. So it gives you the best of both worlds. And you literally can get 3 to 4 times the number of stems off of a plant by pinching earlier in the process.
Right. So you can get more stems on the pinched plants, and then you can have an extended bloom time overall by not pinching some of the plants.
Yes.
Okay, and then our fourth tip is going to be to cut often. And this is one that can be difficult for people. Again, if you're just starting out growing cut flowers, you don't want to cut as often as you actually should be cutting. And that's really key to the productivity of your cutting beds.
It's so true. And again, when you follow these, tips that we're giving you, like planting in full sun instead of in shade, I understand why people get a little shy from cutting their flowers if they haven't been growing in the best conditions for those plants and as a cutting garden. But friends, when you plant the right plants and plop them out in full sun and then cut them, they just continue. It just keeps the plant so healthy and productive that it changes everything. You just really, really, you have to experience it firsthand.
Yeah, and that is why it can be good, if possible, to put the plants that you're specifically going to be using for cutting, perhaps not in your ornamental beds, because you do need to be cutting them back
Yes,
regularly. How
that's
often do you like to harvest, Lisa, on the farm?
so we harvest on Mondays and Thursdays. There are some flowers that could benefit from more frequent harvesting, but for an overall efficiency, we just cut twice a week, and that is plenty. Because what you want is you want to get the flower as soon as it's at the earliest stage you can for harvest. As with zinnias, that's fully open. You don't want to leave a fully open flower out in the garden for very long because the dry wind and the hot sun and bugs walking on it, and just making marks. So twice a week we have found to be the perfect recipe.
What would you recommend for someone that maybe they're a home gardener and they don't need that many flowers from each plant? What would you recommend in that instance?
To plant less and
Yeah.
still harvest frequently, because it starts a vicious cycle. And we had firsthand experience with this as we've downsized the big production farm to this teaching garden. We planted too much and didn't cut it all. And within just a couple, 3 weeks, all of a sudden, our garden is just full of old flowers and our plants stop producing. So you are so smart to go smaller and cut more frequently than to plant big and not cut as often.
Yes, that is so true. Okay, our fifth tip is going to be to cut deep on your branching plants. And this is another one. It can be very painful for people just starting to grow cut flowers because when you cut deep, you do lose out on a lot of side shoots that have to get stripped off. But this is another one that's really critical to getting another round of nice, long, strong stems that you're going to be able to harvest.
Exactly. And I learned early on in my career just how beneficial it was to cut deep. I followed the instructions that, I had been told. And it's like, me, the old rule follower, I just did it. And I just absolutely could not believe how many more stems grew from the base of that plant, versus so many times we're inclined to just, you know, cut that bud with the short stem to preserve all those side shoots that are below it. But in fact, cutting low on that stem near the ground level, just above 2 to 4 side shoots or leaves, really sets that plant up for a life of incredible stem production. And it just keeps branching plants. I mean, you can look at these pictures
Yeah.
and just see what the growth is like.
And then, like you mentioned before, harvesting like that, it makes it possible to space closer because there is more air circulation because you're
Yes.
constantly taking out big parts of the plants.
Yes, so true.
Okay, so our last point is going to be to plant successions. And this is, again, another common mistake some people make. And they're so excited and they plant everything at once. They fill up all their beds, and it might even be overwhelming, but it's great at first. And then those blooms start to fade. And then you realize, uh-oh, there's nothing else in the hopper.
It's so true, Layne. And I think that making that mistake and just planting every square inch I had available to me in the very beginning. And the other mistake I made is I planted, I'm a small space farmer. I mean, in the farming world, my farm is, less than 3 acres. And of that, only at the height was an acre and a half of production. Now we farm on less than half an acre. You have to get the most out of that square footage. And in the beginning, I also filled my garden up with perennials. And then all of a sudden, one day I realized, oh my gosh, I have nowhere else left to plant. And
Right.
these perennials only bloom for a short window if they have to be cared for year round. So I really learned the full lesson early on. And that's what led me down the path of succession planting. And that just simply means breaking up your garden space into 2 or 3 or 4 blocks, whatever works for you, and plant the first block at the beginning of one season. And for us, we plant in fall a section of garden, and then in very early spring we plant a section, and then our first summer we plant a section. And then by the time I run out of that planting space, guess what? That fall planted stuff is finished blooming and is ready to come out and more planted there. And I just can't tell you how much more production you can get out of so little space. It's less ground to care for. And it's just all around a great way to garden, and it spreads the work out also.
I think the most difficult part is just showing that restraint and not filling up your entire space all at once.
I mean, it's true. It's like being a compulsive buyer when you go to your favorite
Yeah.
store and there's a big sale going on. It's hard to, not buy it all. You have to show some real restraint. And I don't plan detailed, like in exactly what I'm going to grow. I think of my garden in those sections, like in blocks of beds. And I just say, beyond those blocks of beds, we can't plant anything else. When you fill it up, so sorry. You should have planned better, Lisa. And it really gets you into a discipline, and it is so rewarding.
All right. Well, that was it for our tips about how to maximize flower production. If you all have any tips, feel free to share those in the comment section over on YouTube, or you can use the form linked in the show notes. And don't forget to head over to our course webpage that I'm going to link in the show notes and check out that free session. You can also watch our welcome trailer, which was also really fun. So please be sure to check that out. And we hope to see you over there inside our course.
And friends, Layne and I are kind of assuming that everybody knows what cool flowers are. Cool
Right.
flowers is the term that was created by my first book named Cool Flowers, about growing cool season hardy annuals outdoors in a garden. And these are some of the earliest and most delicious blooms of
Yeah.
spring, those that are just so coveted by folks. I mean, we're talking bells of Ireland and snapdragons, sweet peas, and just some of those most endeared crops. And they have awkward planting times most often. And so that's why the whole book was born. And this course is just taking that concept and taking all the question marks out for you. So we hope that you will go over and check it out.
Yes.
All right, friends, until we meet again, bye, Layne.
Bye.